The porch light at 14 Sycamore Lane is on again tonight. The pale yellow house sits quiet at the far end of the block, its windows dark except for that one fixture burning above the front door, the way a candle burns when someone is waiting for a person who may not come back. 3 weeks earlier, nobody would have thought to look at that house twice. A week before that, a man and his dog were still 3 blocks away, asleep in a corner rental on Delwood Street, with no idea the light was burning, no idea what it meant, and no idea that before the month was out, the life inside that yellow house would become the most important thing either of them had ever found. The morning it began, the temperature in Harlan Falls, Tennessee, sat at 22 degrees. Gunnery Sergeant Nate Calloway, retired, 6-week civilian, did not sleep past 4 in the morning. He had not slept past 4 in the morning in 11 years. His body did not know how to stop standing watch, and the rented house on Delwood Street was quiet enough that every sound from outside reached him clearly. So when Boone lifted his head from the foot of the bed at 4:41 and went still in the way that meant something real, Nate was already sitting up. Boone was a German shepherd, 7 years old, and 78 pounds of tan and black muscle and precision. He had served 2 deployments with Nate in the same capacity Nate had served, which was to say without hesitation and without complaint. His muzzle had gone gray at the corners in the past year, but his amber eyes were as sharp as the day Nate had first met him, in a kennel at Camp Lejeune. And when those eyes fixed on a direction, Nate had learned to fix on it too. What Boone was fixing on now was the front door. Nate pulled on boots without lacing them, took his jacket from the chair by the window, and followed the dog down the hall. He smelled the cold first, seeping under the door gap. Then he heard something beneath the cold, something intermittent and thin. He opened the door. The basket sat on the second porch step, padded with a folded fleece blanket printed with small yellow ducks. Inside the blanket, bundled so tightly that only a small round face was visible above the edge, was an infant. A girl from the look of the pink knit hat pulled to her eyebrows. Her eyes were closed. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold. Her breath, quick and shallow, made tiny clouds above her face. Boone did not bark. He did not lunge forward. He lowered himself slowly to the porch boards, chin nearly at ground level, and stared at the basket the way he stared at things he did not understand but intended to. That posture, in 11 years, had never been wrong. Nate stood in the doorway for a full 4 seconds, long enough to confirm what he was seeing was real. Then he stepped out, lifted the basket carefully in both arms, and brought the baby inside. If you are watching this story and you feel something already, stay with it. Subscribe, turn on the bell, and watch this one all the way through. Because what happened next over the following 9 days in this small Tennessee city will remind you that goodness still exists in the world, and that sometimes it arrives in the last place and the last body you would expect to find it. Nate Calloway had come to Harlan Falls 6 weeks earlier for no better reason than that it was the only place he had a claim on. His mother, Patricia Calloway, had grown up there and left at 18. She had passed away 14 months before, when Nate was still deployed, and the thing she had left him was not money or furniture, but the lease renewal on a corner house on Delwood Street that she had kept paying monthly out of sentiment since her own mother died, as if keeping the address meant keeping the door open to a place she had once called home. Nate had not planned to use it. After 21 years in service, 2 combat tours and 8 disaster relief deployments, and the kind of sustained low-level trauma that never gets a medal, because it is just Tuesday, he had separated from the Corps in December and arrived in January with 1 duffel bag, one dog, and a very clear sense that he did not know what he was supposed to do next. He was 39 years old, 6 feet 1 inch tall, with a broad frame that still held its military posture, despite 6 weeks of nobody requiring it. His hair was cut short, dark with gray pushing in at the temples. A diagonal scar crossed the left side of his jaw, pale against tanned skin, the remnant of a vehicle door that had come apart the wrong way during a convoy in 2017. His eyes were pale gray, the color of February sky over Tennessee, and they moved the way they had always moved, cataloging rooms, exits, sight lines, the body language of people who might or might not be what they appeared. He did not know how to stop doing that. He had stopped trying. Boone went with him everywhere. The Corps had approved the adoption when Nate separated, a formality that Boone had made clear was also unnecessary, since the dog had demonstrated no interest in being anywhere Nate was not. In the rental on Delwood Street, Boone slept at the foot of the bed, sat beside Nate's chair at the kitchen table, and in the morning stood on the porch watching the street with the attentiveness of a creature who understood that watching was a form of care. He still wore his working vest on outdoor walks. A dog that had spent 7 years being useful did not stop wanting to be. Nate had made almost no connections in 6 weeks. He had eaten twice at the diner, spoken briefly to the mail carrier, and nodded to neighbors who nodded back. He was not unfriendly. He simply had not yet figured out the civilian version of himself that was supposed to exist between the man he had been and whatever came next. He woke at 4, made coffee, walked Boone, and watched the city outside his windows with the patience of someone waiting for orders that were not coming. The baby changed the calculation entirely. He laid the basket on the kitchen table and unwrapped the blanket carefully, checking the infant the way he had been trained to check casualties, methodically and without panic. She was warm. Her color was good beneath the cold, flushed cheeks. She was breathing evenly. She was awake now and looking at him with the unfocused, serious gaze of a very new person encountering the world, not yet decided whether it deserved her approval. He guessed her at 5 or 6 weeks old. There was nothing else in the basket except the blanket, the baby, and a single folded piece of paper tucked beneath her right hand. He read the note standing at the table, holding it in both hands. The handwriting was careful, the letters slightly uneven, the kind of careful that comes from trying hard when you are not practiced at it. It said, "Please keep her safe. She is 6 weeks old. Her name is June. I saw your truck. I know you will not let anything happen to her. I am sorry." That was all. Boone pressed close to the table and put his nose near the edge of the basket. He held it there. Then he looked at Nate. Then he looked at the door. Nate stood at the kitchen window with June held against his chest, because she had begun to make a sound that suggested she was considering a louder sound, and he stared at the pre-dawn street outside and thought carefully about what the next hour needed to contain. He did not call 911 immediately, not because he intended to avoid it, but because Boone was still watching the door, and Nate had learned in 11 years to pay attention to what that meant. It did not mean danger. It meant the thread did not end here. He pulled on his coat with June against his shoulder, settled her into the crook of one arm, and opened the front door. The cold hit him square. Boone moved past him onto the porch, stood for 3 seconds with his nose lifted and his ears forward, then stepped off the porch and turned left. Nate followed. The street was empty and gray in the hour before sunrise, the air still and bitter, their breath fogged ahead of them. Boone moved at a steady trot without hesitation, not tracking a scent the way he tracked in the field, but walking with purpose, the way he walked when he already knew the destination and was simply going there. He turned left on Maple. He crossed Church Street without slowing. He turned right at the corner where a pharmacy sat dark behind locked glass. He stopped in front of a small, pale yellow house with a porch light burning above the door at the address 14 Sycamore Lane. A woman was sitting in a wooden chair on the porch. 60 degrees of temperature between the chair and a warm interior, and she was sitting outside. She was small and very still, wrapped in a heavy coat that had seen many winters, her white hair pinned back above a face that had once been round and was now drawn finer by age and something that looked like recent worry. Her hands were folded in her lap. She was not asleep. She was looking at the street as if she had been looking at it for some time. Boone walked to the base of the porch steps and sat. The woman looked at the dog. Then she looked at the man behind the dog. Then she looked at the bundle in the man's arm. And the sound she made was not a word. It was the sound of a body releasing something it had been holding too long. Her name was Vera Hutchins. She was 71 years old, 5 feet 2 inches tall, with a frame that spoke of a lifetime of physical work grown finer with age. Her hands were arthritic, the knuckles prominent, the fingers slightly curved even at rest, the hands of someone who had spent decades at a sewing machine. Her brown eyes were still clear and sharp and filled now, but she did not look away. She had a quality of stillness that reminded Nate of the senior NCOs he had most respected in service, the ones who had seen enough that nothing required drama, who delivered hard truth in flat voices because they had learned that plain was kinder than elaborate. She rose from the chair slowly, with the care of someone whose body required negotiation in cold weather. She said, "That is my granddaughter." "I know," Nate said. "Danny left her with you." "She left her on my porch. I don't know your daughter." Vera reached the bottom of the steps and held out her arms. He placed June carefully, and Vera pulled the baby to her chest and turned her face into the knit hat and stood there in the cold, doing the work of holding together the parts of herself that were trying to come undone. Boone did not move. He sat at Vera's feet and was still, his amber eyes on her face. And after a moment, Vera put one arthritic hand on the dog's head without looking down, the way you touch a thing you have trusted, without needing to examine why. Nate stood on the front walk with his hands at his sides and waited. When she had composed herself, Vera looked at him over the baby's hat. "You should come inside," she said. "You look cold." He almost smiled. He was, in fact, extremely cold. Inside, the house was warm and spare and carefully kept. A braided rug, faded but clean. A couch with an afghan folded over the arm. Framed photographs on the walls, so many they formed a continuous record. Decades of a family looking back from the plaster. A sewing machine in the corner with a half-finished garment still pinned to its feed plate. The whole of it smelled like coffee and cedar and something beneath those, the particular scent of a place someone had kept together a very long time through sheer effort, and who was tired. Vera put June down in a small bassinet beside the couch, already made up with fresh blankets, as if she had been expecting this or simply had not allowed herself to put it away. She went to the kitchen, and Nate heard the coffee maker beginning its work. He sat in the chair Vera indicated and looked at the photographs. A younger Vera, dark-haired, laughing beside a man in navy dress whites. The same man, older, with a small girl on his shoulders. The girl at various ages, the girl grown into a young woman, thin and watchful-eyed, holding a newborn with the terrified tenderness of someone who had not expected love to arrive in this form. Vera came back with 2 mugs and sat across from him. She said the name without preamble. "Danny is 28. She has been living with me since she was 6 months along. We were managing. She paused. Managing was a word that carried its own weight. Nate waited. 3 weeks ago, a man came to the door. Aldridge. Marcus Aldridge. She said the name the way people say names they have rehearsed against their own anger. He works for a group called Community Care Partners. He said the county had flagged my property taxes for early default review, that I owed $4,200 and had 60 days before formal proceedings. He had paperwork. She looked at her coffee. I do not owe that. I paid every year. But the paperwork looked real. And I am not a person who knows how to fight paperwork. What did he offer? Nate said. She looked at him. You know what he offered. He nodded. He offered to make it go away, in exchange for a managed care agreement, which is a contract that gives his organization decision rights over the disposition of this house and first right of refusal on purchase at assessed value. Her voice was steady. My husband built this house. He was 26 years old, and he built it with his hands. He died in it 14 years ago. She looked at the photographs. I will not sign that paper. Nate looked at his coffee. That answer stayed in his head longer than he expected. He called Deputy Corinne Tate from the front walk before he left, because the baby needed to be reported, and Vera needed the official visit document. The call was brief. He gave information in sequence, told Tate what he had and where he was, and told her to come when she could. Then he walked back to Delwood Street in the rising light, Boone beside him, and the cold felt a degree less sharp than it had an hour earlier. He could not explain why. It was not warmer. Something else had shifted. He did not go back to bed. He made fresh coffee and sat at his kitchen table with his laptop open, and he began reading about Community Care Partners. Patsy Odom had been running the Main Street Diner for 19 years, and she knew more about Harlan Falls than the city manager did. She was 58, broad-shouldered, with gray-streaked brown hair pinned under a clip and a manner warm without being soft. When Nate came in the next morning, she placed a coffee in front of him without being asked and had Boone a bowl of water on the mat before Nate had taken off his coat. He asked about Community Care Partners. Patsy set down the coffee pot and looked at him for a moment with the expression of someone deciding how much of what they know to give a stranger. He let her look. Sit at the counter, she said. She knew 3 families personally who had been approached. An 82-year-old man on the east side of town, a woman in her mid-70s near the school, and a couple out on Birch Road, all targeted within the same month. In every case, a tax issue had preceded the visit. In 2 cases, the people had been frightened enough to sign preliminary agreements before anyone told them they could refuse. Vera Hutchins refused, Nate said. Patsy was quiet for a moment. Vera is tough, she said finally. She is also alone, and she is not well. Nate looked at his coffee. She has a heart condition, Patsy said. She was supposed to be on medication. She told me 2 months ago she had started skipping it. The copay was too much. That hit him harder than he expected. He ordered eggs and toast and ate at the counter while Patsy named facts and people and years, and in the accumulation of those names, a picture of Harlan Falls assembled itself that was warmer and more complicated than the one Nate had built in 6 weeks of watching from outside. He left a 20 on the counter and walked back to Vera's. He found her sitting at her sewing machine, working with the slow, deliberate focus of someone whose hands hurt, but who will not let that stop them. June was in the bassinet, awake and content, watching the ceiling. Nate sat in the same chair as the day before and did not offer anything immediately, because Vera was the kind of person who would say what needed saying when she was ready. She said, without looking up from her work, "Did you sleep at all last night?" Some, he said. You look like a man who has been reading about something he is angry about. I've been reading about community care partners. Her hand slowed. How many households in Harlan Falls have they approached in the last 18 months? Nate said. Vera set down her work and looked at him. I don't know that number. 14, he said. That I could find. There may be more. The room was quiet. Outside, a car passed slowly on Sycamore Lane, and Boone, sitting by the door, lifted his head and tracked it with his ears. The car kept moving. The tax default flag, Nate said. That was manufactured. Your taxes are current. I checked the county records. They are public. He paused. Aldridge's organization has a contact inside the county assessor's office. That contact has been placing early default flags on targeted properties to create a pretextual urgency. You did not owe $4,200. You were made to believe you did. Vera did not move for a long moment. She looked at her hands. When she looked up, there was no surprise in her face, which told Nate she had suspected some version of this, and had simply had no way to confirm it alone. What do we do? She said. It was not quite a question. You let me and Deputy Tate build the record, Nate said. You do nothing that looks like resistance on your part. You answer the door politely if Aldridge comes back, and you do not sign anything, and you call me immediately. 3 days after that conversation, Kyle came. He was the proxy Aldridge used for follow-up visits, a man in his mid-30s named Kyle Marsh, who arrived in a silver-gray Honda Civic with a Tennessee partial plate that Nate had already noted twice in the vicinity of Vera's house. Nate saw the car park from the front window and stood to the side of the frame as Marsh came up the walk. Boone rose from the floor beside Vera's sewing table and moved to the door without being asked. Standing parallel to it, ears forward, tail low, not growling, present. It was a distinction Nate had learned to read. Marsh knocked. Vera answered. He was pleasant and unhurried, the kind of pleasant that comes from practice, a man who had said these words many times in front of many doors. He mentioned the tax matter. He mentioned that Mr. Aldridge was concerned for Vera's welfare. He produced a single sheet of paper from his jacket pocket and said it was simply a memorandum of understanding, a formality, easy to sign. Boone moved 2 inches toward the door gap. Marsh glanced at the dog. His pleasant expression shifted. Not much, just enough. I will be in touch with Mr. Aldridge, Vera said. Thank you for coming. She closed the door. Boone sat. Vera looked at Nate across the room and said nothing. Nate pulled out his phone and photographed the car and plate through the window before Marsh had backed out of the parking space. Carl Brewer appeared on Vera's porch the following morning unannounced, carrying a cloth bag of groceries and a folding card table that he set against the railing without explanation. He was 67 years old, retired Navy, with a broad gray face and thick hands, and a knee that required a cane on cold mornings. He walked with a slight forward lean that spoke of a man who had learned to compensate without complaint. He handed the grocery bag to Vera and then turned and looked at the loose bottom step on her porch as if the step had personally offended him. Who is fixing this? He said. No one right now, Vera said. I am fixing it now, Carl said. He did over the next 2 hours with tools from his truck and a confidence that required no discussion. Nate helped without being asked, and Carl accepted the help without commenting on it, which Nate recognized as the highest register of approval available from men of Carl's generation and temperament. When the step was solid, Carl sat on the porch rail and drank the coffee Vera brought him and looked at Nate. Patsy says you have been reading about Aldridge, he said. Yes? I know 2 families he hit. The Morales family on the east side. 92-year-old man with no family nearby. He signed. Carl's jaw tightened. They sold the property at assessed value, which was 40% below what it would have fetched on the open market. The family found out 6 months later when it was too late. Nate absorbed this. There is a veterans network in this county, Carl said. We get things done when they need getting done. You say the word. Deputy Corinne Tate was 34 years old, compact and precise, with dark hair in a practical braid, and steady dark eyes and a quality of attention that reminded Nate of the best intelligence officers he had served beside, people who listened without signaling what they were listening for. She came to Vera's house on day 5, and she and Nate sat at the kitchen table with a folder of documents between them while Vera made sandwiches, and June slept in the bassinet. Tate spread the documents and walked Nate through what she already had, which was more than he expected. She had been building a file on community care partners for 14 months. She suspected the assessor's office connection, but had not been able to confirm it without exposing her inquiry. She had the names of 8 families whose properties had been transferred at below market value, and Kyle Marsh's full record, which included a civil fraud finding in another county 5 years prior. She did not yet have anything directly linking Aldridge to the manufactured tax flags, but she had enough to request a state audit of the assessor's records. I need one more thing, she said. I need someone who can document Marsh's visits to multiple properties on multiple dates. Something that establishes the pattern of approach. Carl Brewer's network, Nate said. Tate looked at him. Carl got you into this? Carl fixed a porch step. She almost smiled. Over the following 48 hours, through Patsy's contact list and Carl's network, Nate collected signed written accounts from 4 families who had been approached by Marsh using the same language, the same paperwork, the same manufactured urgency. None of them had known about the others. Each one, told they were not alone, exhaled in the way that people exhale when they have been carrying something in silence and are finally permitted to set it down. On the 6th morning, Vera was on the phone when Nate arrived. She was sitting at the kitchen table with the receiver pressed to her ear and her eyes closed, and a particular stillness had come into the room that was different from the stillness of a quiet house. It was the stillness of something that had been held back for a long time, meeting the edge of itself. She said, I know, baby. I know. Just come home. She said it twice, and then said nothing more for a long time. When she set the phone down, she sat with her hands flat on the table. Nate waited. Danny called, she said. She saw her grandmother fall 4 nights before she left June with you. She thought I was dying. She panicked. Vera's voice did not waver. She is 28 years old, and she has been terrified since she was 6 months pregnant, and she made a terrible choice. She is at her cousin's apartment in Clarksville. She looked at her hands. She did not know how to call. She did not know if she had the right. Tell her she has the right, Nate said. Vera looked at him. He said, tell her to come home. 20 minutes later, Vera was on her feet, reaching for her medication bottle, when her hand stopped and she went pale in a sudden, particular way that Nate had been watching for since Patsy told him about the skipped doses, and he was at her elbow before she could sit without help. He got her to the couch. Boone pressed against her legs from the other side, solid and warm, his weight a steady fact. Vera pressed her hand flat against her sternum and breathed in controlled increments, her eyes closed, her face drawn tight. Nate found the medication in the kitchen and brought it with water. She took it and sat with her head back against the cushions and did not speak for several minutes. He sat on the coffee table in front of her and watched her color slowly return. Boone did not move from her side. When she opened her eyes, she looked at the dog first, then at Nate. "I am not dying," she said. "That is not what this is." "I know," he said. "We're going to the hospital anyway." She began to object, and he waded through the objection without expression, and when she had finished, he said it again in exactly the same tone. They went. The hospital kept her 4 hours. A cardiologist adjusted her medication, issued a new prescription, and arranged a follow-up in 2 weeks. Nate sat in the waiting area with June in the basket beside him. Boone sat at his feet. The nurses found reasons to walk by. When Vera emerged, she looked steadier than she had all week. She looked at Nate with June and did not say anything for a moment. "You have done this before," she said. "Taken care of something small." He thought about that. "No," he said, "but I understand the parameters." He stopped at the pharmacy on the way home. He knew about the VA's Community Pharmacy Assistance Program from a briefing in his transition class that he had thought at the time he would never use. He was wrong. He made a call from the parking lot and had the answer before they got back to Vera's house. She would pay $11 a month for the new prescription. She covered her mouth with one arthritic hand and looked out the passenger window of his truck for a long moment. $67 to $11. He did not say anything about that. He did not need to. Marcus Aldridge came in person on the 8th day. He drove a dark blue sedan and parked 2 houses down, which Nate noted from the kitchen window with a professional quiet, and then came up the walk in a gray overcoat that cost more than most people in this neighborhood spent on clothing in a year. His sandy hair was combed, his wire-framed glasses catching the thin morning light. He was 52 and carried himself with the ease of a man who had almost never been told no. His smile, when Vera opened the door, was warm and practiced, and did not change when he saw Nate in the hallway behind her. Boone stood beside Nate. Aldridge looked at the dog. The smile held, but something in his eyes recalibrated. He said he was just checking in. He said he was sorry the process had created anxiety. He said there were updated terms he believed Vera would find more comfortable. Vera said, "Mr. Aldridge, I have spoken with Deputy Tate at the Sheriff's Department. I have also engaged Community Counsel regarding the tax default notice I received. I have been informed that my taxes are current and that the flagging in the county assessor's system appears to have been an administrative error." She looked at him steadily. "I will not be signing any documents at this time." Aldridge's smile remained in place. "I understand," he said. "Of course. I am always here if anything changes." He left. Boone watched him down the walk. Nate went to his truck and photographed the sedan and its plate, then sent the photograph and timestamp to Tate, who had asked for exactly this. He sat for a moment with the engine off, watching the street. The pressure in his chest had been building for 8 days. It was beginning to ease. 3 days later, Deputy Tate filed the compiled evidence package with the Tennessee State Nonprofit Oversight Board. It contained signed accounts from 7 households, the documented pattern of manufactured tax flags, Kyle Marsh's civil fraud record, and surveillance photographs of Marsh visiting 3 properties in a single day in December. The assessor's office contact, a junior clerk named Penfield, who had been paid for each flag he placed, provided a full written account after 90 minutes of conversation with a state investigator. Community Care Partners was placed under formal administrative review pending a state investigation. Marcus Aldridge's operating license in Tennessee was suspended while the investigation proceeded. 14 households were notified by the county that any tax default flags associated with their properties had been reversed as procedurally invalid. Kyle Marsh's vehicle was not seen on Sycamore Lane again. Danny Hutchins came home on a Thursday afternoon in the 3rd week of February. while the snow was beginning to recede at the edges of the yards, the first thin showing of brown grass along the south-facing fences. She parked in front of her mother's house and sat in the car before she got out. Nate was on the porch with Boone when she pulled up, helping Carl replace the rotten fascia board on the overhang. He watched Danny get out of the car and stop on the front walk and look at the house and then at him in the way that people look at strangers who know things about them that they have not yet said aloud. She was thin and watchful-eyed, with her mother's brown eyes in a face carrying weeks of particular exhaustion. Her coat was too light for the weather. She looked at Nate for a long moment. "You're the Marine," she said. "Yes," he said. "She was okay," Danny said. "June." "She was fine," Nate said. "She is fine." Danny looked at the door, then at her feet, then at Boone, who had come to the edge of the porch and was regarding her with the serious attention he gave to things he was still deciding about. After a moment, he sat. She said, "I did not know what else to do." Nate looked at her with the same level regard he had given that calculation for 8 days. "You knew enough," he said. "You picked the right door." She went inside. From where he stood, Nate could hear the sound of the reunion, the particular quality of sound that a house takes on, when people inside it are no longer separated by the distance of a terrible week, when that distance collapses and what replaces it is just the fact of being together. It was not loud. It was 2 voices and then 3. The third, the soft and questioning sound of a 6-week-old who had spent her first days passed between careful hands and had emerged apparently untroubled, as if she had known all along that she was loved by all of them. Carl handed Nate a fascia nail without comment, and they went back to work. The following morning, Patsy opened the diner early, and people came before 7. Vera came with June and Danny, walking slowly and more carefully than she had in January, but walking. Carl came with 2 men from his network, both veterans, both with the quiet, purposeful manner of people who show up because showing up is what you do. A woman named Gloria from the street behind Vera's brought a casserole in a foil pan without explaining why. 2 of the families who had signed accounts for Deputy Tate came with their adult children. They sat in the booths along the window and drank coffee and ate and spoke in the way that people speak in a community when a thing that has been wrong is beginning to be right. Nate sat at the counter, and Boone sat at his feet, and the morning sun, still thin in late February, came through the diner windows in flat, pale sheets and fell across the tablecloths and the faces of people who had weathered something and were still here. Vera came and sat on the stool beside him. She had June against her shoulder, the baby awake and studying the room with the careful intelligence of a person taking everything in. Vera was quiet for a moment, looking at the room. "Your mother grew up here," she said. "Yes." "Did you know her?" Vera's eyes moved to him. "Before you came here. Did you know who she was when she was a girl in this city?" Nate looked at his coffee. "No, not really. She did not talk about it much." Vera was quiet. Then she said, "Patricia Calloway. She was 2 years ahead of me in school. She was kind." She paused. She was the kind of person who made the room feel quieter just by being in it. The good kind of quiet. That hit him harder than anything that had happened in 8 days. He did not say anything. He looked at the coffee and held what she had said in the way you hold something fragile, carefully, with full attention. Vera put her free hand briefly over his. She did not comment on the fact that his jaw had tightened, and he was looking away from her. She simply put her hand over his and then took it back, and they sat in the diner with the morning coming in through the windows and the people around them talking. and Nate Calloway felt something shift in the region of his chest that he had not expected to feel in a diner in Harlan Falls, Tennessee in February. But there it was. 2 weeks after the state investigation opened, the Oversight Board confirmed that 14 households in Harlan Falls had been targeted through a coordinated scheme involving manufactured tax default flags, fraudulent institutional pressure, and below-market acquisition contracts. Marcus Aldridge resigned as Director of Community Care Partners before the board's formal findings were published. The assessor's office clerk named Penfield received a civil citation and was removed from his position. 3 of the families who had signed agreements received legal assistance in challenging those transfers. The cases were ongoing, but the machine had stopped. Deputy Tate closed her file on Community Care Partners with a note that the case had come together because a veteran 3 blocks away had followed his dog in the dark and asked the right questions. She did not write his name in the summary. He had not asked her to. Danny enrolled June with Vera's family doctor and began picking up part-time work at the hardware store 4 blocks from the house. She and Vera moved through the yellow house together with the slightly tentative care of 2 people who love each other and have recently remembered how. And the house was quieter and also fuller than it had been before, which was not a contradiction if you had ever been inside it. The late February morning, when the last snow of the season came down in soft, unhurried flakes, was a Saturday. Nate arrived at Vera's with coffee and lumber for the back fence, 3 rails that needed replacing, a job Carl had identified 4 days ago with the certainty of a man who expected the information to result in action. The yard was quiet and gray, the snow settling in thin layers on the dead grass, and Nate set the lumber against the fence and stood for a moment in the cold. Boone moved past him and crossed the yard to the back porch, where Vera was standing in the open doorway with a mug of coffee, watching the snow. She was wearing a heavy cardigan, her white hair down for once. She looked rested in a way that she had not looked when Nate first saw her on the front porch in the dark 3 weeks ago. The worry around her eyes had loosened, and there was something underneath it now that had not been there before. Boone sat at her feet. Vera looked down at the dog and then looked across the yard at Nate. She raised her coffee mug slightly. He raised his. Inside, through the window above the kitchen sink, he could see Danny at the table with June, the baby propped against a pillow, and the light above the table made a warm circle in the gray morning. A single amber lamp against all the February cold outside. And from where Nate stood in the yard, it looked like the photographs on the walls inside, like a thing that had been true for a long time and would continue to be. He picked up the first rail and set it to the fence post. He was not going anywhere. There are people in this world who spend years moving because movement feels like the only honest response to grief, and we do not blame them because sometimes the world earns that particular exhaustion. But there are moments when a dog walks ahead of you in the dark and leads you somewhere you were never planning to go, and the someone you find at the end of that walk needed exactly what you have to give, and what you find, without expecting it, is that you needed them in return. Nate Calloway did not come to Harlan Falls looking for a family. He came because his mother had left a door open, and it turned out that the door led somewhere. It always does. If you are holding someone close tonight who was given to you unexpectedly, if you are standing in a yard or a kitchen or a hallway, in the particular quiet of a life that is fuller than you planned, then you know what this story is really about. May God bless you, protect your family, and remind you on the days when it is hard to believe that goodness still comes. Sometimes it comes in the dark, at 4:42 in the morning, in a basket on a porch step, with a note that says, "I know you will not let anything happen to her."